All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the annual fire briefing for the governor. As we start this season, we're going to hear today about some of the predictions of what we're up against, but what I want to know most, and I know the governor does too, is are we prepared for what comes? That's the message that this meeting's really focused on. I also can't kind of move by today without recognizing that yesterday was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and an airship that really changed wildland firefighting's history, Miss Montana, flew over the beaches of Normandy, dropped parachuters yesterday, or on the 5th, and we'll be dropping them today. And hopefully in August, this is the 70th anniversary of Man Gulch this year, and hopefully we'll be able to get an honor flight dropping paratroops over Man Gulch this summer as well. So, and if you've been to Man Gulch, it tells you one thing, and I did a speech last night. It's life and death decisions every day for wildland firefighters. If you make the right one, everybody's safe, and good things happen, and you make the wrong decision and bad things happen, and sometimes nobody's safe. So with that in mind, I'll just ask that everybody does a round of introductions. I'm John Tubbs. I'm the Director of the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. My friend Steve. Go ahead, sign it.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning,
Sonia Gurman, State Forester and Division Administrator for Forestry Division at DNRC.
Good morning. I'm Colonel Mitch Moretti. I'm the Director of Operations for the Montana National Guard. I'm sitting in for General Quinn and Major Jeff Holycross.
Thanks, Colonel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm John Cataldo, and I'm the Fire Management Officer for Yellowstone National Park.
Good morning. Bryce Rogers, I'm the Regional FMO for the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Mike Cooney, Lieutenant Governor.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning.
Mike Ranger, representing the Fish and Wildlife Service and the State FMO.
Good morning. I'm John Bullock. I'm the brand new State Director for the Bureau of Land Management in Montana, Dakotas. Couldn't be happier to be at this table today.
Glad to have you on, John.
Thank you.
And good morning, Leanne Martin, Regional Forester for the Northern Region of the Forest Service.
Delilah Bruno, Administrator of Disaster and Emergency Services.
Good morning, Rich Cowyer, Fire Chief for Columbus Fire Department and the excuse me, President of Montana State Fire Chiefs Association.
Governor, Lieutenant Governor, nice to see you again. Mike Dagrowski, I'm the Chief of the Fire Protection Bureau for DNRC.
Good morning, Governor. I'm Colleen Haskell, and I am the meteorologist for the Northern Rockies Coordination Center Predictive Services.
You want to go around the outside?
Yeah, why don't we just go around and see.
Good morning, Governor Matt Hall, Deputy Bureau Chief, Montana DNRC.
Good morning, Governor. Deputy Director, DNRC, Carrie Baker.
Good morning, Governor. Paul Sanderby, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Manager of the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge.
Good morning, Governor Ralph Robb, Director of Fire Aviation and Air for the Northern Regional.
Good morning, Governor Aaron Thompson, the DLM State Fire Management Officer from Montana.
Governor John Hingerberg, Forest Service State Liaison.
Good morning, David Clem, Air Quality Bureau Chief, Department of Environmental Quality.
Good morning, Tom Lyver, State Budget Director.
Good morning, John Grass, Public Information, Montana DNRC.
I'm David Murray from the Great Falls Tribune Star. Patrick Holmes, Governor Bullock's Natural Resource Policy Advisor.
Marissa Perry, Governor Bullock's Communications Director. Karen Ranger, Governor Bullock's Press Secretary.
Good morning, Governor. David Abrams, Public Affairs Specialist with the Bureau of Land Management.
Great. You probably don't. Hi, Corin. Yeah, and again, thank you for being here. I think this is what, my 6th or 7th one of these, and to underscore what Director Tubbs said, this is more about preparedness than predictions, right? That we can come in at times and say this is going to be the least impactful fire season we've had in years. I think that's what I heard in 2017, and we had 1.3 million acres burned. So I want to thank you for being here. As you all appreciate, no wildland fire agency can do it on its own, can succeed on its own. We operate in an interagency cooperative framework. And when fires start, I've never heard anybody at this table or anybody that's expecting their properties to be protected, nobody cares what color that engine is. The citizens demand that we work together in an effective, a timely, and a coordinated response. And as the fire season unfolds, the cumulative fatigue that all of our teams will face stress tests that strength of these partnerships that we have around this table. And as it has every single season while I've been governor. That's why it's so important that as some face change around the table, that we make the time at the onset of the season to make sure that we're prepared, and we get together to ensure that we've done all that we can to prepare for what could well be uncertain. It's also, from my perspective, an opportunity to stress the local, state, tribal, and federal partnerships that make our shared firefighting, wildland firefighting mission a success. I also know that as fire seasons have gotten longer and by many stretches more severe, that the duties that face each of our teams have shifted from just a seasonal issue to actually a year-round responsibility, forcing us to train, to prepare, to respond, and recover from fires continuously. So I want to take a moment to thank, first of all, and that's in all sincerity, all the work that the teams have done, not for what's going to happen in the future, in the days and weeks ahead, but what you've done to get all of us here and prepared today, because I know it takes a heck of a lot of work to do. I know that we've worked hard based on our past experiences to improve the way that we make decisions, and also always be considering the safety of our wildland firefighters. This season, I certainly hope that we continue to make strides in communications at all levels of our organizations to ensure that we're providing both as safe and as effective a response as possible, no matter what the conditions we might face this year are. And while we're here today to focus on ensuring effective wildfire response, I'd be remiss if I didn't briefly acknowledge the progress, though, that we're also making on other aspects of a cohesive strategy. Grateful to Sonia Gurman, Forestry Division Administrator, for her work and the State Forest, as both the Division Administrator and the State Forester, for her leadership with our Forest and Focus 2.0 and the recent work to update our state's forest action plans. Through that work, what we're really doing, and through our alignment with the Forest Service's shared stewardship efforts, we have an opportunity to support the other two legs of what a cohesive strategy really are, and that's building the resilient landscapes and fire-adapted communities. Leanne, it was last December that I last met personally with the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Perdue, and I told him that I felt that the Forest Service and Montana are as aligned on our work together as has ever been the case in this state's history that I know of. And a lot of that's owed to your leadership. So thank you for the good work that you've been doing, not just on behalf of the Forest Service, but on behalf of all of the forests, both federal and state and private, and also on behalf of the citizens. So thanks for that good work that you've been doing along the way. Also want to acknowledge the good work of the National Guard, General Quinn, who's not here, and also Delilah Bruno from DES to administer a new funding opportunity from the Omnibus Appropriations Bill of last year, which was hazard mitigation grants from FEMA for communities that have previously been impacted by fires during the 2017 session. Just got done with this American Legion Boys State program where you have kids from all across the state come in and they have a chance also to ask questions. And a young man got to ask a question from Sealy Lake. And it was fun because he said, like, what are you all going to do for our communities to ensure that things like this don't happen. And we can't control everything, but we can also say, not only is here's what everything we've done, but here's also things that we can do going forward. Program really does offer opportunities to better align community wildfire planning and adaptation work so we can better address those local priorities for resiliency and recovery. So I understand that we're leading the way nationally in the way that we're doing this grant, implementing the grant. So there's a lot here and a lot to do, and we have a pretty tight agenda for an hour and a half, so we'll save sort of the greater discussions and questions for as we get into this. But for now, turn over to our first presenter, and you're going to tell me all the truth, right, Colleen? Colleen Haskell's the meteorologist for the Northern Rockies Coordination Center.
Okay, there's a lot of information in this handout, and so I'm just going to kind of hit the high notes, and if you have any questions or you want more details about any of this information, please let myself or Mike Richmond know, and we'll be glad to provide more. And Mike does send his best wishes. He's back at the station holding down the fort. So to get started, we'll just put things in context of what is considered to be the averages that we see here in the Northern Rockies and specifically in Montana, and then some of the factors that we do consider for prediction. And yes, some of it gets complicated and it's prediction, but really the response is what it's all about here. So over the last 10 years, the average for Montana is about 1,800 fires, and that equates to about 360,000 acres annually in the state. And that is about 63% of the Northern Rockies total for all of the agencies combined. And about 75% of the acres are in the state of Montana. Overall, in the Northern Rockies, there are about 500,000 acres that are burned annually on that 10-year average. Let's skip forward to the 2018 season specifically. It was relatively quiet last year. In the state of Montana, there were about 75% of that 10-year average that burned, and that equated to only about 25% of the 10-year average in terms of acreage that was burned. That's different than what was predicted also, just similar to 17. We were expecting last year to be above average significant fire potential based on some of the factors that we'll discuss later. And in reality, what happened, it was dry. You know, we did see some of the warmest temperatures as we've seen those trends continuing. However, the pattern that we saw was more of a westerly flow, and most of the lightning remained to our south. So we like to say that the Great Basin stole our thunder last year. So it ended up in the Northern Rockies that we burned about 147,000 acres last year. And so it was relatively quiet. We didn't have those persistent periods of high pressure ridging like we saw in 2017. So the fuels weren't as drought stressed as what we could have had. So certainly that was a good thing. So let's take a look at a little bit broader perspective of the acres burned over the 7 biggest seasons, and all of those have occurred since the year 2000. So that's kind of important to note some of those trends, that we are seeing a higher frequency of those peak seasons in terms of acreage. And I did put a reference here on the right-hand margin of that slide that there is a new report that just came out about the 2017 flash drought in the region. And that is authored by many contributors, but the lead author is DNRC's Michael Downey. So I encourage you to take a look at the conclusions from that, and one of them is stressing partnerships and resilience and working together for preparedness. That was one of the biggest lessons learned in the conclusions that I saw. There is a correlation here on the graph that I have for the biggest seasons between the average temperature during fire season. Here we have plotted July in the yellow graph, and then the bars, those red bars, are the peak seasons. Now you'll note that, say for instance, 2013 was one of our warmest seasons on record, but we didn't have the number of acres. It wasn't considered a peak fire season for a number of reasons. And we'll step through some of those factors that we consider, but temperature is one of them. So now we're looking at page 3, the factors that influence the fire season severity. And we start in the lower right-hand corner, and I'll address each of these components here. But the antecedent conditions from the fire season previously, so after everybody's, hunting season starts and we've had our season-ending event, that's when we go to work putting together this fire season outlook for the next year. And for this year, as we'll see, there was some carryover dryness that was taking place in the northern panhandle of Idaho and extending into northwest Montana. So that is one of the areas that we're watching very closely. It's a longer term situation where we've had this persistent dryness in the northwest corner. The next thing that we consider is the coupling of the atmospheric and oceanic circulations that we call ENSO. And so we are in a weak El Nino status right now. We'll look at that in a moment. The next thing as we go through around the horn towards the left side of that graph is the winter snowpack. And more importantly, not so much how much snowpack we get here in Montana, but how does it come off? And how are the fuels able to use that moisture that goes into the soils? So that's something that's been, with average temperatures this spring, that's been very favorable for us compared to what we saw last year where we had very warm nighttime temperatures and it came off very quickly and we had more flooding. All important, however, are the July temperature and precipitation values, and we'll look at that in a moment. Culminating with lightning, right? We have to have the ignitions. We're talking about significant fire potential. What are the underlying conditions that lead to the probability that we could have an extreme fire season? It all boils down to what we didn't get last year, and that was lightning. So here in Montana, it depends on regions, of course, but most of the acreage is due to ignitions by lightning. And unfortunately, we can't predict that more than about 7 to 10 days out. Certainly not with any accuracy, and that's an area of research that we're stressing where we need some help. Okay, here's a go back on the bottom of page 3. What we are noticing is a trend across the state and across the West in general in the changing climate regime where we have increasingly warmer temperatures during the month of July. So NOAA takes 30-year chunks of climatology, and that's what we compare to normal, all right? And some people call them averages. So according to the 30-year periods that are shown on the left, starting with the 1971 period, and then ending with the current cycle that we're in that started 1998 to 2018, temperatures are 4 to 5 degrees warmer across the West. And here in Montana, it's about 3.5 to 4 degrees warmer during the month of July. So as we can see at each of these particular cities, those are points that give us reference that this is happening on a larger scale. The other thing that we are noticing is that the precipitation is as much as 1/3 of an inch less for the month of July at each of those stations. And in a greater scale, we're seeing this also across the rest of the Northern Rockies as well. So looking at Northern Idaho and also North Dakota, to a lesser extent the further east you go. So that's something that will come back into play as we go through the rest of the briefing. The next graph looks pretty busy, but what that is, it's showing 4 of our peak seasons, the weather patterns that we saw during those seasons at the mean flow at 500 millibars, which is where we define our troughs and ridges. So each of those sets of maps is the actual weather pattern, and then next to it on the right is the anomaly, or how much different than normal that is compared to the climatology. So as you'll see in the lower right, that's July 2017, and the bullseye of the high pressure ridge was right over Montana, and it was anomalously warm, and that led to several days in a row of warming conditions where we also had very dry fuels because they didn't get to recover at night with the relative humidity. That's an effort that we're starting to work with the Missoula Fire Lab on, some research, so that we can define that better at those mid slopes and higher, where traditionally we didn't really have those issues. We are starting to see, according to this linkage to the research community here, that possibly because of the lack of sea ice extent in the Arctic, we are seeing those high pressure ridges more frequently and more intensely. And that, as you noted, is leading to longer fire seasons on the order of about 78 days per year across the western U.S., and certainly including the Northern Rockies and Montana.
And that's over like the last 30 years?
That is since 1970.
Okay.
Yes. And so, like I said, I'm just sort of making some references, and we can always dig into the specific research papers. So that is one reason that they think we are seeing some of these changes in the weather patterns and some of the areas of emphasis that we need to be doing a better job at forecasting so that we can predict this. So less sea ice extent means that there's less of a gradient, not just because of the colors, but the temperatures, and that leads to the wind flow pattern changes and could potentially be leading to more frequency of those high pressure ridges and less of that westerly flow that we did enjoy last year. Another impact that we are seeing across Montana and the western U.S. Is that for regeneration of fuels in post-fire recovery, they're seeing that stand replacing fires could be leading to abrupt ecosystem transitions. In other words, for Douglas fir and ponderosa pine at lower elevations, they may not be repopulating themselves as they could have in the past due to the higher temperatures in July when the seedlings would be taking hold. So those are just a couple examples of some impacts that we're seeing that are weather and climate related. So just kind of to give you an idea of what we've been looking at and how some of those factors are playing into our predictions now. And now we'll switch gears a little bit and look at each of those factors that I introduced a minute ago. One of them is that seasonal trend in the water pack, or the snowpack, I should say, during the water year that begins October 1st. And even though we're still getting snow in this pattern, we stopped measuring that on April 1st because there is still some accumulation but also some melting, so that offset is really hard to account for. So traditionally we stopped the snowpack at April 1st. And as you can see in that graphic, there was a flip from last year, which is on the right, where we had the most abundant snowpack here in Montana across the west, and deficiencies across the Great Basin in California in the red and yellow colors. This year, on the left map, we show that we were slightly above average in the Northern Rockies, but the deficiencies were clearly in Washington and then into the Panhandle. And for us, for our purposes, once again, the northwest part of Montana was lower than average, or right about average. Abundant snowpack, of course, in California and the Great Basin. So this is indicative or an El Nino-like pattern, even though it was kind of a delayed onset because we did have the ocean circulation, but the atmosphere didn't really couple until about February. And that's where we started getting all of our record cold and record snowpack for March. Okay, that leads us to some of the closer trends for the last 90 days. We're looking here on the top graphic at the percent of normal precipitation. The driest areas are noted in the orange and red colors once again. So we can see that along the Canadian border, north of the Missouri River breaks, and then also in extreme southwest Montana, we do have some deficiencies. And those are more of that short-term dryness for the 90-day period. But the longer-term dryness is still in northwest Montana. So we're looking at Flathead, Kootenai, and then into the northern panhandle of Idaho for our neighbors. And then as far as temperatures are concerned, for the same period of time, for the 90 days since we began in March, overall Montana has been cooler than average than those 30-year climatology. The exception is northwest Montana, where it's been warmer than average. Not significantly so, but we do see that that's the trend that's continuing. And as such, just this week, the U.S. Drought Monitor added Northwest Montana to the moderate drought, the D1 category. And there is a little bit of long-term dryness for north of Missoula in the Ronan area leading up to Flathead Lake. So those are a couple of areas that we're watching, but we're also getting a lot of ground truth from people in the field that are starting to put in their fuel moistures. While we're in this green up stage, we're transitioning, and they are saying things are much drier than expected, and things are burning and consuming more than they thought. So no, I wouldn't call it a surprise, but definitely we're trending that way.
Is that something we're seeing throughout the state, or just in particular areas?
Just in particular areas.
South, or the north, northeast, northwest, and then southwest, perhaps?
North of the Missouri River breaks, as we would expect, but we didn't have as many wind events this spring either, and we saw those cooler temperatures. But some of the other areas that we're getting that information from are like the Big Hole area, which was also very dry last fire season. So we're just coming online with all those fuel moistures, and that's what we're seeing across the board, and especially in Northwest Montana.
Yeah.
So back to the big picture just for a moment, if you would. That ENSO status for El Nino is continuing the weak El Nino. Typically for the Northern Rockies, including Montana, that means a cooler and wetter summer. Well, back to what I said about the temperatures in July becoming warmer than average. What does cooler really mean? Does it mean closer to normal? I think so. So we're looking, and what does wetter mean? Fuels might be in better shape, but does that also come with lightning? More ignitions. It's not as easy as face value here. But there is an expectation that the weak El Nino it will continue through fire season this year and possibly intensify for fall. And weak El Ninos in the fall here tend to be warmer and drier.
You break my heart every time.
So, double-edged sword means that, you know, we could get more lightning strikes, but overall we are expecting more precip than the climatological averages, with that El Nino intensifying before winter. And our friends at NOAA's National Weather Service, the Prediction Center, for the season, June through August, the expectation is for warmer than average temperatures west of the Continental Divide, and those are the orange colors. But for eastern Montana, it looks like equal chances or near normal. So for what that's worth, we also have the precipitation probability on the right there showing a wetter than average summer months. Once again, during July and August, the expectation is that will come with at least some lightning. So could that mean we have more ignitions but smaller fires? Possibly. All right, so overall, we put those factors together and we take them all into consideration, and the monthly outlooks that we have here on the back page are for the months of June through September. And this is probably the first time in my 30-year career that I've seen that much green on the map for June across the western U.S. and very little drought. So we are expecting that through the green up period, have normal, or what we consider normal potential for significant wildland fire. And then starting in July and continuing through September, we are expecting above average significant potential for Northwest Montana. And everybody else in the region is expected to see normal significant fire potential. That's not forecasting any acres or numbers of ignitions, but just those underlying conditions that could lead to significant fire above those large fire acreages. So,
thank you, Colleen. Questions for Colleen?
Thanks. You're welcome.
Yeah, great. I very much appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Chief DeGrosky, DNRC Fire Activity and Resources. So, good morning. We're off to a slow start, as you can imagine, based on Colleen's briefing. But I want to remind you that we had very similar conditions in June of 2017. We've seen a slight uptick of fire occurrence recently with a little bit of lightning we've had. As of yesterday, there were 7 small fires burning in the state. So far to date, there have been 201 fires reported statewide for about 7,000 acres. I would say full-on fire season is still several weeks off, even in eastern Montana. You just heard the current forecast. We will certainly be keeping an eye on that Lincoln, Flathead, Lake County area as the season develops. One thing that I want to just call out is that a normal fire season in Montana, as Colleen has shown us here, means hundreds of wildfires burning tens, if not hundreds of thousands of acres, costing taxpayers millions of dollars. So whether it's a normal fire season or not, we need to remind folks that the citizens and the visitors need to be vigilant and careful with fire. We're very confident of our preparations for the fire season. Most of our seasonal employees are have been hired, or already at work and are completing critical training. We're completing our pre-season readiness inspections and maintenance of both ground-based equipment and our aircraft. We're finishing up our annual pilot training. We've field deployed 3 of our MT-205 helicopters and will field deploy our 3 fixed-wing patrol aircraft in the next week. All our agreements, including with the National Guard, Montana Highway Patrol, Department of Transportation, the Northwest Compact, and other states have all been updated. We have an annual operating plan in place to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species through our operations. During the off-season, we trained more than 3,000 fire agency personnel who put in thousands of hours in training. And I am feeling quite confident that we're ready.
Thanks, Mike. One question and it might be, Colleen, and this is beyond what you need to know, but trauma was felt in Helena a week ago. You know, when people woke up and all the smoke from Canada, and people like rightfully said, we're not ready for this.
Right.
Is Canada, our neighbors to the north, is it looking pretty dry?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, and for the same reasons that we have that along our Canadian border.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Looking at that map last week, it was really all the way from southern Alberta. It's very stark that there's a transition just north of the border.
Yeah.
And it's not the border. It's a physical transition into dryness, and they have just not seen moisture and have had above normal temperatures. Yeah. And it's that arboreal forest, right? So it's really dry and ready to go. And I would suspect they will be demanding resources for quite some time. And we've already deployed.
Yeah, and I should add, we are a member of the Northwest Compact, and we are actively working with our partners in Alberta. We will be sending a coordinator up there soon to help should they need resources from us.
As they've helped us out so many times. Thanks. Any questions for Mike? Chief Cowger.
Thank you. To start off with, I want to say a sincere thanks for your signature on Senate Bill 160. I know that doesn't have much to do with the wildland area, but it does. Cancer is quickly becoming one.
No, that's right. After 20 years to get that done is significant.
The bill's not perfect, but it got us some groundwork to work off of, and we'll go up from there. So I appreciate your support on that.
It's great to see you there.
And sorry, we're getting a call back home. I do want to, Lieutenant Governor's comment there about the fuel moistures. I was just talking to Mike real quickly before we started about, we are starting to see some little fires just on a local basis. One in particular that it didn't come to life till 2 o'clock in the morning in an area that should have never come to life at 2 o'clock in the morning. In fact, that was a holdover fire from lightning strike 2 or 3 days ahead of the game, and it cleaned itself up. So green fuels the whole 9 yards, and just really surprising to us. And shortly after that, we got rain and some hail, and there's probably some snow and some locusts somewhere that have gone along with the It is kind of interesting to what that fuel moisture looks like and whatnot. But I will tell you that one of the concerns of ours in the fire service, of course, this isn't just a Montana issue, but it's a national issue, is the state of our volunteer systems. In the state of Montana, we rely heavily on volunteers. Roughly 435 departments across the state. Of those, probably only 13 are career or have a combination of some The combination side of things puts it up around 20 some apartments across the state. But there's a significant decrease in volunteers across the nation, and it's no different here. You know, and much of our wildland area is covered by those volunteers. And so there is no silver bullet as to what that looks like to fix out there, you know, but we continually do work on that. We continue to apply for safer grants to help to try to do recruitment and retention, but these smaller areas are just smaller areas, and we have to deal with that. But that is one of the frontline partnerships with DNRC on initial attack on some of these areas. And so while I'd like to say we're probably as prepared as we can be, and I think we are at the local government level, it is always a concern that those numbers are not going up and continue every year to see a significant increase. I was just at a conference in Pennsylvania where they talked about, like 20 years ago, they had over 100,000 volunteers across the state of Pennsylvania, and I think they're down into the 30,000 range now. You know, and so it makes us really step back and look at what's our business model and how do we do things different. You know, and again, there's no silver bullet to that. But with that said, I will say I think everybody's as prepared as they can be out there. The heart and soul of volunteers you can't compete with. You know, so when they set their mind to do it, they're going to be there and take care of business. What I will say from a local standpoint, and I'll bring this up with the partners at the table, is there's a couple things. One is we've got a state wildland committee that we work with DNRC on, and that was born out of necessity. There was a point in time when we weren't seeing eye to eye, local government and state government.
I've never had that happen.
No, never had that happen. But that's been ongoing now for probably almost 15 years, and what we like to say now is those are pretty short conference calls once a month.
Yeah.
Because we really had a chance and opportunity to iron out the issues between us, and now it's a pretty seamless operation. And that's a model, I think, in the state that we'll continue to follow, and it truly has been successful in the way that we operate, and truly brought us together as better partners. And then to build on that with the Northern Rockies board, again, it's a model across really the nation, because I think we're one of the few boards regionally wise that has local government sitting at the table. And so, you know, again, while we may not always see eye to eye and our missions may look a little different, that gives us that, as you talked about, that preseason opportunity to sit there and talk about what are these issues, what are the things that are going to divide us on the ground, and how do we take care of those. And I've had the opportunity to sit on several national committees, national wildland committees, and again, I go back to saying, sometimes we think we're remote and we're removed from the rest of the United States because we're in Montana, and sometimes that's a really good thing because we do have a working relationship that's not mirrored necessarily all over the place. And when you start to see some of the frustrations and issues in other states and other regions, and you kind of sit back there and really have nothing to add to the conversation because like we dealt with that 10 years ago. That's pretty encouraging, and we continue to build to that and go forward with that, and I think that helps the Northern Rockies side of things be more prepared than what a lot of other regions are for that. And then other than that, we've got one other thing that will help in that preparedness, and I hope I'm not going to steal Delilah's thunder or whatnot, but there's a program called NMAS, National Mutual Aid System, put out by the International Association of Fire Chiefs, that we're right on the brink of subscribing to, and what that will allow us to do is basically have a user-based system across the state that anybody that wants to put their resources in there and make them available for deployment, be it wildfire or all hazards, now gives both DNRC and DES and local government the opportunity to track those and automatically ask for help. You know, and of course, once it goes up into a campaign situation, it's going to take a little different stance and look, but it'll be the first time that we know of in our history that we actually have a tracking mechanism to say what's available out there to us on our worst day, kind of thing. So we're hopefully literally weeks away from getting those contracts signed and that program up and running. So
that's great. Yeah, and Rich, in a state of 138,000 square miles, we couldn't do this without all of the volunteer effort too, and it is concerning. There's more and more people, their lives are so full that they're not. So any opportunity you have, please also extend my personal thanks for the work that folks are doing, because I know they get pulled out of their homes and their kids' events and things like that, but the coverage is absolutely necessary.
Yep, I do a great job.
Is there any questions for Rich?
Thank you.
Great. Delilah, DES.
So just three things. The first, the length of disaster declarations. We worked hard this last legislative session to make sure we extended those dates or those times a little bit. We were limited to 20 days on an emergency prior to signing this legislation and 30 days on a disaster declaration. We were able to extend that up to 30 days for an emergency, 45 days for a disaster, ensuring that we have between National Guard troops and others out supporting wildfire efforts, that they're going to be able to stay there until the job's done. Definitely brings us more in line with the types of fire seasons and flooding seasons that we've been seeing over the years. So that's point number one. Number two, we've got some strong processes and relationships across the nation through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC, that lets us tap into resources that might not be available in the normal fire world if we get into a situation where a town is maybe overrun or evacuated and we need extra help from outside. We're confident in that program and that process, and of course we work really close with DNRC and other folks to ensure that we all know how to access resources if we need to. Third piece I just want to bring up is has to do with our community relationships and the partnerships we may have with local government. We really lean into our local disaster and emergency services coordinators and local officials to get that comprehensive picture of what the cascading impacts are to communities and to people when a disaster strikes or a wildfire gets close to their homes. So we pull that information up and are definitely sharing those with the decision makers at the state to prioritize resources and efforts to the best of our ability. So those three areas, especially that last one with the information that's rolled up, help us work with FEMA to secure different funding opportunities during the wildfire season. You mentioned the mitigation funds that have become available due to previous wildfires. We'll be heavily engaged in that if we get into those same situations. We're also happy to have a FEMA integration team or a FIT team member from FEMA Region 8 here stationed here in Montana for this wildfire season. They'll be working as a liaison if we do get into a situation where we need federal support. And of course, we've got one phone call away from our friends in Denver who are always happy to support if needed.
Great. Thanks, Delilah. Any questions for Delilah? Regional Forester Martin, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thanks and so Grace for all our partners. I think I wanted to start, Governor, was just a thank you to you, because as you mentioned in your opening remarks, there's a lot of work that we do year-round that leads us to being prepared for suppression activities. And Forest and Focus 2.0, your support of the Good Neighbor program is vital to everything. And it's really exciting because, as you said, during suppression, nobody cares what color the engine is when we're dealing with wildfire. What I find so exciting, and Sonia and I and John working on this, we're getting that same energy and that same type of philosophy across everything that we're doing out there to address the forest health crisis. And so thank you for your support of all that. And it's exciting. It's exciting seeing what's going on. When it comes to the suppression side, we had a few challenges with the government furlough, and we definitely are feeling some of that now. However, we're prepared. Even during the furlough, we stayed moving forward with all of our training. Our fire personnel stayed on, and we continued moving forward with our fire and our fire hires. So we are prepared going into this season. We'll see how the predictions come out on that part of it, and feel very comfortable from that standpoint. We do have nationally around, give or take, we'll have between 33 and 38 air tankers between our exclusive use and our call when needed. Here in Montana, we have on 15 exclusive use helicopters. Those range from your Type 1 to your Type 3, Governor. We also have 16 call when needed vendors, which give us about another 26 or so helicopters on a call when needed for within the state here as we go into fire season. Personnel-wise, we have a variety of our crews out there. We do have all our engine modules, hot shot crews, smoke jumpers, all our personnel on. With all of our crews, overhead, permanent, and seasonals, we have around 1,500, which is about normal for us going into this season from that standpoint. Some are coming on a little bit later because of some of the ripple domino effects with the furlough, but we have them on, they're finishing up their training and getting all their certifications. So we're feeling really good about that. You mentioned Alberta. We actually have 4 incident hotshot crews that left a couple of days ago up in to go to Alberta and help out there.
Great.
From the Flathead, Bitterroot, Lolo, and I just Helena, Lewis, and Clark. We had crews go out, so we've got folks that are up there, which is wonderful, helping out our neighbors across the border and also getting some great experience and being able to learn and share experiences. So it's feeling good that way.
That's great.
From that. And then the only other thing I was just kind of curious about, you mentioned your National Mutual Aid System, so I'll be real curious how that works and working together with the partners on that too and sharing those resources. So appreciate that because we're all in it together on that part. And I like the moisture you're predicting. Well, I'm going to go with that right now.
Good call. I hear convection.
Yeah.
So that's all I have listed for questions.
Great. Thanks, Leanne. I'd also note, just as sort of an aside, so I actually spoke to Secretary Perdue yesterday about the Anaconda Job Corps. And like when you think of, as we're all prepared, so many of folks end up going back to college and others. And I think it was about 40,000 hours that we got out of those corps during the 2017 fire. So I know that there's going to be the pause is put on there, but an extensive conversation on the USDA side, whether this is part of their mission. And to the extent that you're in those conversations, I mean, for rural economic development, for what those provide, having that as part of the USDA has been, I think, significant for the state. Yeah, and really appreciate your efforts. Any question for Leanne? Great, and John, welcome.
Thank
We're
you.
glad to have you.
I couldn't be happier to be here.
Could be no better place to be a state director of the BLM here.
Amen. So, day 13 on the job, 2 of which I have spent with our firefighting forces in Billings. And you asked coming into this meeting today, are we ready? And my observation of those crews is that they're more than ready. They're rocking and roll ready. So under Aaron's leadership, I think the Bureau of Land Management is set to go. We had our first fire that the veterans crew, met the veterans crew up there, a bunch of young people, more than anxious to get dirty. They had their first fire at Shepherd yesterday, small, 17-acre fire. Interagency, I'll call it, but it was a local fire department showed up and our guys showed up and that fire was out quickly, right? Yeah. And they're just mopping it up now. So they're ready to go, and I want you to know that. Last fire season was below average, 60 fires, 1,000 acres. We have excellent cooperation and support with those local fire departments and counties. That's a very important aspect for us. We underscore the safety of our firefighters in public, foremost in everything we do. We have 17 wildland fire engines, 2 tenders, the Type 2 veteran crew that I just mentioned, all in Billings ready to roll. We have 3 Type 2 helicopters and Helitac modules associated with them, located in Lewistown and Miles City. We have the large air tanker out of Billings and a couple of sea bases in Lewistown and Miles City as well. Single engine air tanker bases there. In my trip up to the firefighting group, I got to also visit the fire cache. So we would have one of 3 national fire caches. I know Forest Service has a number as well, but 3 national caches. That cache can support 1,200 firefighters at any given time. So they are a large operational group that we're delighted to host there in Billings. One of the most proud things we have is our community assistance agreements. We dump about $1.5 million into those local fire departments and counties in Montana and South Dakota primarily. And that money helps a lot in fire education and mitigation and providing training and materials and equipment for those small units that don't have that ability to fund that level of assistance. We rely heavily on that interagency and tribal partnership relationship, especially with our friends at DNRC. It's nice to meet you, John, for the first time. I think it's safe to call everybody John at this table today. Someone's going to respond. So those partnerships are meaningful and important. We have done a lot of work in preparedness and recently donated 2 of our used fire engines to Eastern Montana, one to Phillips County, the Malta Group, and the other to Custer County down out of Ismay. 2 small rural departments that have our old gear, but good gear that they're going to be able to utilize going forward. And those are my highlights.
Great. Thanks, John. Any questions for John?
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. I'm excited to be back.
Fish and Wildlife Services. Mike.
Well, thank you, Governor, for having us here today. I would say that we are the small kid on the block here as far as our agency is concerned, the number of firefighters that we have. Director Tubbs and yourself asked if we were prepared this year, and we are prepared. Last year I came here and talked a little bit about how the struggles that we have in hiring firefighters. Those struggles were still there this year, especially when we had the furlough and we did the same. And we were trying to hire the same firefighters at the same time. And that happened quite a bit. But we were able to get a full component of firefighting capability this year, and we're looking really good. The key to that is training and preparedness and partnerships. And Director Tubbs, I have to say that our partnerships with DNRC is exceptional. Mike and I have been working on an agreement to be able to pay each other for the work that we do, mostly us pay them for the resources that they're helping us with. And we're this close to having that done, and that will basically open the floodgates to be able to utilize some of the federal dollars to be able to do some fuels work on some of our land.
Great.
And, I can't talk about wildfire without talking about prescribed fire. That's a passion of mine. And Paul and I were talking about our prescribed fire this year, and we had the most successful prescribed fire that we've ever had on the Charlton Russell Refuge this year in conjunction with the BLM. We're working with our partners to do landscape level prescribed burning. I was able to conduct a 7,400 acre burn in that Doug fir, ponderosa timber type that Colleen was talking about, that we're having standard replacement wildfires in those now. And even in the areas that we don't necessarily think about as major forest, we do have forest there, and we do have old growth forest, and we're losing that forest. And so we are being very proactive in getting out there and trying to put fire on the landscape in May before July hits, before we lose all of them. It was a very successful burn, and I think that's the future for us. We have to treat our forest in order to save the forest from these standard replacements. And so we've been very proactive with that. As far as partnerships are concerned, I can't have this discussion without talking about our interagency Eastern Montana Type 2 IA hand crew. It's a partnership we have with DNRC, the BLM, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we were able to field that crew 4 times last year. Very successful. We're getting glowing recommendations about the crew when they come back from assignments. And the Type 2 interagency hand crew is looked upon very similar to a hotshot crew, because those individuals on that crew are agency personnel, and they have that background and experience and knowledge and fire that I'm on an incident management team. I'm an ops chief, and when I see a crew like that show up to a fire, I'm going to put them into the hotter places, because I have confidence in the crew, and I know the background. So that's what's happening with this crew. And so it has been very successful, and I'm hopeful that we can add to that, because our resources are dwindling. The number of firefighters that we have are shrinking, and we're having to work together to be able to provide for that opportunity. And also our protection agreements. Like I started out, we are the small kid on this block, and without those protection exchange agreements that we have across the state, we cannot do our jobs. And for the western part of the state, the DNRC is responsible for fire protection on Fish and Wildlife Service, on eastern part of the state, we're responsible for a lot of those DNRC lands within our refuges itself. And it's worked out extremely well. And I think for the taxpayer itself, it has been a win-win type of situation. So we look forward to continuing with that. And lastly, I'm going to end with the Man Gulch and the 70th anniversary of that. I've been around long enough that I was at the 50th anniversary celebration. And I was actually a wreath carrier on the 50th anniversary of the Man Gulch celebration and remembrance. And, you know, we go into every fire season, we train our people to not repeat that scenario. And we take it seriously, and it's the leader's intent that we give to all of our young firefighters that we've experienced this in the past, we don't want to relive this experience again. And so I think it's something that we drill into our firefighters, and you can see the fatalities that occur in our wildfires across the nation are going down as far as the fatalities on the incident itself. You know, unfortunately, we still have fatalities, but it's something we can continue to work on and we take it very seriously. But that's something that I think, as a group here, it's something that we really drill home with our new firefighters. And lastly, I already said this, but lastly, it's easy to come to a table like this, and speaking in front of the governor and directors, it's easy to say, oh, we all get along, right? It really is when you're sitting on a table like this. But we really do. Rich hit the nail on the head. And that we do get along very well in our organizations. We don't always see eye to eye, but we work together for the good of the whole. And I think that's what teamwork is all about, and that's what our agencies, I think, it's one of the glowing examples of success that I can look across our counterparts in our agency and say that we have been very successful in that here in Montana. That's all I got.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, to your and John's point too, it was August 5th, 1949, the day of the Man Gulch fire, worst disaster in the history of smoke jump. I was a tour guide all growing up through my college down the Missouri River, so I would talk to people about the Man Gulch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I drove one of those boats, and just as you were saying that, I was thinking, it is 70th anniversary.
Yeah, yeah.
Year.
And Miss Montana, if luck has it, will be back and commemorate.
That's great.
And we'll continue. You know, DNRC often takes a crew of young firefighters up there, and there's no ground in Montana or really anywhere. There's a few places in the nation, Storm King Mountain and now down in Arizona, but where you can bring a young wildland firefighter and bring home that decision on how to be safe. Because that decision happens every day
and the danger
firefighters out there.
Yeah.
And so that's really why we hold that memory as close as we do in the wildland firefighting, is it triggers the whole change in fire science and how we professionally manage firefighters in this nation. It's good for us around this table to remember that, because young and not so young people are out there fighting fire every day, and we got to thank them and make sure that they're safe.
Any questions for Mike? Mike, thank you. Bryce Rogers from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Bryce, thanks for being here.
Good morning, thanks for having me. You know, it was good discussions there. We tell our folks to, you know, bring everybody home after each fire. And we just got done yesterday with all the readiness reviews for each reservation throughout Montana, one in Wyoming that we cover. So with that, we had 350 fires last year, down from the year before. 83% of those were human cause. 81% of those were 10 acres or less. So, you know, been catching a lot of those fires. We had no IMT teams on any of the trust lands that we have. Kind of proud of that. Hopefully it stays that way. One more year. Just been, you know, assisting the tribes, helping our partners. We've got 2 exclusive helicopters, one in Crow, one in Billings. Of course, we'll rotate them throughout the state as need be. And we have a hot shot crew out of Brown, 20 engines throughout the region, Type 6 engines, 8 Type 4s. So we got some resources that are available to our programs. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bryce. And another reminder, when you say 81% were human caused, that this isn't all about lightning. There are conditions that we at this table have to continue to underscore the importance of being careful when you're out in the woods, because time and time again, when we're seeing significant fires and losses where we know that it could have been preventable, it's problematic. Any questions for Bryce? John Cadalto from the Park Service.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
As we know, Glacier and Yellowstone National Park host the majority of the Park Service assets that can be brought to bear in the state of Montana, at least on short notice. We're squarely in the middle of our preparedness season right now. We're going to be ready. Glacier has done a lot of good work this spring, just reinforcing their partnerships with the Blackfeet Nation to the east and Waterton Lakes to the north. They also hosted a Hands Across the Border workshop to help just learn from, lessons learned, best management practices for international border fires, which are complex. We do a good job in the Park Service of training up our militia. We only have 42 full-time firefighters between Glacier and Yellowstone. So Mike and I might have to wrestle for small fish in the pond. 42 is a low number when you consider when Yellowstone has a big fire, Glacier has one, it can feel like the whole world's on fire. And there's 42 of us. But between the two parks, we've trained up about 200 militia members this spring, and we're not quite done yet at Yellowstone. We've got some more refreshers coming up. Interagency cooperation is really at the heart of what we do. I like to joke that if I ever break this finger and lose the ability to dial a phone, I'm going to be in real trouble, because that's a lot of what my job is phoning a friend when we do a lot of business. But it's a seller's market, fire's a real estate game. We don't have a hard time encouraging people to come to Yellowstone and spend 4, 6, 8 weeks of their summer there helping us out. It's a nice piece of country, at least. Let's see what else. Glacier's put some nice work into the Type 3 incident management team up north, and for a small organization, they've got quite a few folks that are rostered with that and participate with it. Down in Yellowstone, personally, I chair the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee's Fire Subcommittee, and I'd characterize our relationships as strong on that group. It's been around since the 90s. After the Great Yellowstone fires, maybe pretty much very early 90s when that group got started. And we meet annually. We have various cooperating agreements and interagency agreements that help facilitate movement of resources through the Greater Yellowstone area. And we're in a good spot there. It is interesting when you're at West Yellowstone, Montana, you're at the intersection of a lot of things in our fire world. You've got 3 Forest Service regions that come together near there, 4 National Weather Service forecasting offices are all sort of vying for West Yellowstone. And 3 geographic area coordinating centers also come together there. That's probably one of the remaining pieces to really having that area run smoothly is when we get into the higher preparedness levels, the PL4s and 5s, and the GACs start, these imaginary walls go up, and we don't share things quite as liberally or as freely as we'd like sometimes across those administrative boundaries, and we're still working on that. So we've got some room for improvement there, but we're optimistic about it. And we continue to work in our proactive fuels management programs as best we can. As you can imagine, heavy equipment in Yellowstone Park can be a controversial item. And typically, up to this point, we've only been able to get the approval to use heavy equipment around our communities during a fire event. And we're taking a big step this summer, and we're going to actually be able to use some masticators right up against the border near the community of West Yellowstone and tie into some Forest Service projects on the other side of the line. And that's a big step for us. Next year, we have several hundred acres down by Grant Village planned to use heavy equipment, fellow bunchers, masticators, and just start to kind of try to peel it back a little bit. That park can put on biomass a lot faster than you can take it off, especially with a handful of kids with chainsaws in the woods. You just can't keep up with it. There's no way. For Glacier's part, they've conducted a few interagency prescribed fires already this year, and that's a great opportunity to get out with your volunteer departments and your state and your county cooperators and your federal partners and put some fire on the ground together. And you don't want the first time you're on fire to be on a wildfire. So they took advantage of that opportunity. They've had a couple of nice fires, prescribed burns this spring, and they're pretty pleased with that. And other than that, we're going to just try to stay anchored in the cohesive strategy, response to fire, fire adapted communities, and resilient landscapes. And 42 of us in our militia are going to do our part. We appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, John. Any questions for John? Colonel Moreni on behalf of the National Guard.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you all today. I'm happy to report, sir, that the Montana National Guard is as ready for a fire season as we've been. We've got 6 20-man teams pre-trained hand crews. We've updated our volunteer list. We've got 450 volunteers that can provide capabilities in security, communications, and additional hand crews. We've got our 3 firefighter teams with their 3 engines and water tenders that are trained and ready to go this year. And sir, we do have one shortfall or a limitation in a capability, aviation. It's the one that we normally use most. As you know, sir, our Army Aviation Helicopter Unit is getting ready to deploy to an overseas contingency operation in October. And so probably August 1st is the last that we'll see 3/4 of them. But we will have 1 Black Hawk module and 1 Chinook module that will be available through August. We've reached out to the other aviation communities in the Guard, and Idaho, Washington, and Oregon have all raised their hand and said, you know, we'd be prepared for EMAC should you need that capability, sir. Other than that, sir, I think the Montana Guard is ready to go for this year.
Great. Thank you, Colonel Moreni. Any questions? The Colonel. Dave Klemp, I'm going to put you just on the spot. DEQ air quality.
Yes, sir. And you did put me on the spot.
I figured that would be the case.
Yes, I
figured we had time, though, so it's worth at least mentioning.
For bringing us to the table. I'm very interested in hearing the conversation. We too believe that prescribed fire and wildfire go hand in hand. In fact, properly done prescribed fire can actually maybe minimize some of the wildfire impacts that we see. The Air Quality Bureau operates a wide monitoring network to collect air quality data to inform local health professionals, other areas, provide them with the data they need to make decisions to improve their lives or stay safe in certain situations. We also have a cache of monitors ready for deployment. Montana is a very large state. Not all areas are impacted equally. And it doesn't matter whether there's 500 people or 50,000 people in a community. When you're impacted like Seeley Lake was a couple of years ago, it's pretty catastrophic in their lives. And so we're focused also on getting those monitors to the right areas, partnering with Forest Service, getting that data available, pushed out to the citizens, the local health departments. And Montana's future in air quality is very highly tied to wildfire and smoke impacts. So we're also transitioning our regulatory programs and the implementation of those programs to adjust. You know, we're operating a program that was given to us in about 1980, and things have changed. And we've got to be able to facilitate the change and meet the needs of today. If that answers your question.
Does. Any questions for Dave or the DEQ?
Well, you know, as you remarked, when the smoke came into Helena last week, I mean, there was a collective groan in this community about what in the world is going on. We finally had one day of nice weather. The next day came in cloudy with smoke. And part of the reason that I'm very happy that DEQ's at the table is that that's where our citizens are at. They love this state, but when they're sheltered inside of their homes in August because they can't go outside, or don't want their children to go outside. You got to understand that air quality is a key component to fire management. And so, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd only note, as Colleen said at the start, I mean, most experts are saying that fire seasons are 78 days longer than they were. They're more severe. I think as we begin this, we have to begin with the premise of firefighter safety is always number one. Doing everything we can to prepare as you all have prepared well in advance, not just with the hiring of crews, but the work we're doing in the woods and the partnerships and the relationships that are being built. And Montanans have great expectations for the work that we'll be doing from this point forward through this fire season. So I very much appreciate the work that you're doing and the continued coordination, and that knowing when things are above anyone's respective pay grades too, of being able to raise it up so we can have some of those conversations. I'll never forget 2017 with the Lodgepole Complex fire. Having to explain, now I don't remember the numbers, to the head of FEMA, that if you took, it's either 6 or 8 Washington districts of Columbia and put them all next to one another, that was the size of this one fire. So that the recognition of the impacts for folks in the state. Love to open it up for either first discussion or questions from anybody at this table. Then once we're done with that, if the press has any questions for anybody at the table as well. But I don't know if anything else or questions, concerns that weren't addressed.
I would just say that in the county co-op side, DNRC and with our cooperative partners is launching on a long-term strategic discussion. We don't have a silver bullet. We all recognize the same issues. The volunteerism is down. That's partly due to the changing ownership of land and how agriculture works and how the forestry business works. We have 3 people on the logging project. They run big machines. We used to have, 20 sawyers and, a bunch of other people. So we just have fewer people in the woods, fewer people on the farmscape, and that leads to less ability to attract volunteers in our communities. And really, this is the challenge Montana needs to meet in this decade. I think, Mike, we've estimated the volunteers contribute about $50 million in services each year, especially on the big years, and countless fires that we don't even know about. And yet it goes unseen because the state coffers don't pay for it. The discussion is often in a county commission or at a fire district hall on how we can get some resources. So I think stay tuned. In this state, as usual, I think we're going to have to lead and find out a new path forward for the 21st century.
Great.
Director, if I might add one thing. Governor, you're familiar with our county assist team, and their annual training camp is this next weekend, and we're very happy to see that there are 32 BLM firefighters coming to the county assist team camp, including the veterans crew. That's really great. Because in eastern Montana, the BLM, the DNRC, and local government are just interacting on every fire, and that's really great.
Great, thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. This is great to hear this. I mean, when we talk, when we let the public know that we're going to get this briefing, I think there's an anticipation that we're going to roll the dice and try to guess how much fire we're going to see out there. We cannot second guess Mother Nature. We can look at the past winter and the snowpack and all of that, and we use all the best science and all the best work that we can pull together to try to figure this all out. Bottom line is Mother Nature's going to do what Mother Nature's going to do. I've had people walk up to me as I've been out traveling around the state, and they'll say, it should be a great fire season because we have great snowpack and temperatures have been cool and everything looks to it. And it is promising. But it can change so quickly. All we need is a couple weeks of really warm weather, some lightning strikes, and then all heck can break loose. And the good news is that we are prepared. And I think what's really encouraging, and maybe this is a Montana thing, and I'm glad if it is, to have all of us sitting around the table as partners, saying that we're all ready, and we're all ready to work with each other. We have agreements in place. Yeah, we're not going to always agree with each other, but we agree on one thing, that we're going to be there to help each other. And I think that's one of the things that's so important for Montanans to hear. That no, we don't know what Mother Nature's going to do, but whatever she throws our way, we're going to be ready and we're going to be working together. So thank you for the work that you put together. Really appreciate the teamwork, appreciate the partnership, and I think we can all be very proud of us coming together, so thanks.
Thanks, Lieutenant Governor. Questions from press?
Several people have referred to the fact that our fire seasons are intensifying, are growing longer. Is there a long-term strategy? How are we going to effectively fight fires not only this year, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What are we looking at?
Well, I mean, I'll start. Address climate change. There's got to be part of it. And we have to address climate change. I mean, we know the IPCC says, International Panel on Climate Change, says that if we don't, by 2050, actually get to the point of net emissions, and that's for the whole world, at some point you're not going to be able to turn things back. There's work that's being done on a regular basis on resiliency as well that, I mean, either the director or I'm sure Leanne or others could speak of.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit. We don't have all the answers. Our work with the Forest Service and BLM and the other federal partners are bringing management to forested lands to replace fire. Because we're really good at stopping fire, by the way. Nobody kind of acknowledged that, but we stop almost everything. And we've been doing that for over 70 years. And so this whole prescribed fire conversation is part of that answer. Working in the WUI with the Forest Service and G&A dollars is part of the answer.
Wildland urban interface,
Yeah.
in case.
And so the challenge that I don't know how to meet is that season has extended where college kids don't make sense anymore. And even if I could convince the university to change the start date into September, like I wish they would, and have them get out of class maybe later in June, like I did when I was in college, because that would get us at least some firefighters into September. But I need them in October too. So I think the state will be challenged, as the Forest Service, that our seasonality, the way we've built our history for my career, which was relying on college kids and teachers that have the summer off to do our firefighting, we're going to have to go to legislators, governors, and the president and say, this is more of a full-time job than it has in the past, and we're going to have to resource it. And it doesn't mean spending less. It means actually figuring out that we have to spend the dollars to have the people ready to do our job. And we are having that conversation, yeah. And it's a game changer.
And I'd also add one thing that hasn't fully kicked in, and if Leanne has anything to offer. I mean, think about it. In 1995, 15% of the Forest Service's budget went to firefighting. By today's terms, it's over half, with 40% less staff to actually do the treatment and the work in the woods before the fire season. So it was great, and the omnibus that we finally got, and that was Western governors, others working together, Democrats and Republicans, in this practice of fire borrowing. Because if you can't do work in advance of fire season, you know, Katie, bar the door when the fire season comes.
And thank you, Governor. And to me, that's a key part is fire is part of these ecosystems, and it's needed. And so what we need to do and what we're working on is addressing the forest health across large landscapes, across all jurisdictional boundaries, and really doing the work year-round to manage for healthy forests and grasslands. And we're still going to have fires, and we need fire to put more fire on the ground. But it's not the devastating, catastrophic fires. They're managed fires, and they're planned fires. And then the unplanned fires, the intent is to have the protection of the communities and not have the communities at risk to the level that they are right now. So it's doing more of that management across all jurisdictional boundaries, right place, right size, and at the right time, which is a lot of the efforts, of course, we're doing across Montana.
Go ahead,
Governor, if I could, because through Force and Focus 2.0 and through your recent executive order, you've charged DNRC with revising with our cooperators and with a statewide collaborative group to revise our forest action plan. And really what that is we're talking about the mitigation efforts through active forest management and restoration. Governor, you have charged us with operating in an interagency environment, very much like we are right now. And as a matter of fact, most everybody around this table will have a seat at the table when it comes to the forest action plan to address those issues on how are we going to use all the available tools from active forest management to prescribed fire to helping better develop community wildfire protection plans to any number of things, including partnering with tribal nations on these issues, cross-boundary, and really leveraging a lot of the partnerships to get good work done. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Sonia.
And if I might just add an answer to your question, I think you've heard numerous people around the table today mention the phrase fire-adapted communities. We need people to understand that there are not enough resources in Montana for us to firefight our way out of this. And communities need to start understanding that they need to plan for wildfire, adapt to wildfire, so that communities can survive and remain viable should there not be the opportunity for a big intervention by the fire service on any given day.
Other questions?
You guys mentioned that there's like a slower start on Ponderosa and Duckfurs. I'm just wondering what that means for, I guess, the long-term fire ecology and the ability for that area to burn.
As far as the reforestation and post-fire, yeah, the research is showing not just in this area, but much of the West, that the ecosystems are changing species actually to more of a shrub or grass environment because they don't have as many recruitment opportunities for those seeds to, regrow.
And I want to add to that is that some of these species are dependent upon a seed disbursement process. Ponderosa pine is that one of those species. If you have a hot wildfire going across the landscape, it kills the seeds. Right. And so the only way the ponderosa pine can regrow from there is if there's any areas that didn't burn, or the seeds were transported there for birds and the like. And so that's why you have some of these large ponderosa pine fires that have eliminated the forest, and you don't see it regrowing as well, except from the edge towards the
Any other questions?
Governor, what are we looking at as far as firefighting budget, fire mitigation budget in the state right now?
Sure, that we will have, as of July 1st, $38 million in the fire fund. Also made a legislative change so that if need be, we could access up to $16 million out of our emergency fund to address fires, if that's the case. We also got folks to agree coming out, Democrats and Republicans. We walked out of the session with about a $240 million general fund reserve, our ending fund balance, $70 million in the budget stabilization reserve. So look, you can't control everything. You can't control a global recession, but the difference from where we walked in and where we walk out, and knowing that we have a base of dang near $40 million as of the end of this month, and more, that I think that we're well prepared to face the fire season from a state general fund dollars. Anything else? Tom?
Did I hear, and I apologize, I'm not sure who the speak was, but do we have a new system coming online for resource allocation?
That's you.
It's more, I'm trying to give you the condensed version of it, similar to the raw system, which is what the federal system used for resource ordering. We've never had anything in the state that tracks local government kind of resources. So like the EES all hazardous functions, say for a flooding incident or a building collapse or anything, we've never really had a way to capture what local government has to offer. Now we're bringing a system online that will be user friendly, so as a local fire chief, I can offer up and inventory into that system anything that I might have available that could be available for statewide response. The systems will eventually be able to talk, enter through the systems of the raw system, and there's en masse, although it is a different standard, it's more all hazards and whatnot, but they will be able to interface at some point in time and work through that. So it'll give us the ability to have a better grasp of what's available locally for like a surge capacity. So if a community is threatened by wildfire, we need a mass set of engines in there quickly. We can be way easier to look at those and find out what's out there and order them up through a much simpler system, just because of the pay scales and non-pay scales and all that kind of stuff.
And that's coming online?
Is probably as soon as I sign the contracts for it. Shortly.
Soon.
And then we get it built up.
You know, one of the things we haven't mentioned is all the other people that support fire. You mentioned the Job Corps Center out of Anaconda. Their support for our kitchens, because they have a culinary side of the business, allows us to have food for firefighters, which is kind of important if you've ever fought fire. The sheriffs and police officers of this state and highway patrolmen will wear themselves out if we don't pay attention to that partnership, because they're protecting people's private property while we're stopping wildfire. So they're controlling roads and making sure that people have been notified for evacuation. And what we saw in 2017 is complete burnout by certain county sheriff departments that we're paying attention to that. There are just the prison has a crew that fights fire, and then the women's prison has started to staff one of our kitchens. You're seeing the core of the firefighting agencies here, but we don't do it even in this group alone. We need the support of many, and we got to keep an eye on that too.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I would really hope that I don't see or speak to any of you again this year, but I have no doubt that won't be the case. And I will, just like every season, expect when we hit that preparedness level to be getting the daily briefings, and the Lieutenant Governor will as well, to respond when there's any help that we can do to make sure that in a time of competition for resources, that our voices are heard of the expectations and the needs here. And I would just close by saying again, I so appreciate the good work that you do. All the good work that happened in advance to get us to this day, but then all the good work that we're going to expect from each of your agencies and all of those who work under them in the days to come. really appreciate you being here. It's good work. Thanks.
Thank you.